Okay, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Athlone Springs Hotel for this business breakfast. My name is Alan Shaw. I'm president of Athlone Chamber of Commerce, and on my own behalf and on behalf of the board, just want to welcome everybody here this morning in person, and to the many that have logged in online. You're all very welcome as well. I hope you all are enjoying your breakfast here from the Athlone Springs, and thanks to the management here. I think it's a fabulous breakfast so far, so enjoy every bit of it, and I hope you enjoy the conversation we're going to have now shortly from our panellists. So I want to welcome our sponsors, RBK, Chartered Accountants, and TUS Midlands Midwest. Your support is greatly appreciated. I will shortly introduce the panel, but first of all, I just want to mention a number of public representatives that are joining us here this morning. I want to welcome Councillor Emer Kelly, Cathaoirleach of Athlone Area District here in Roscommon County Council. I want to welcome Mayor Louise Heaven, Mayor of the Athlone Municipal District of Westmeath County Council. Of course, I want to welcome Minister Michael McGrath, TD, who I will introduce shortly as part of our panel. I want to welcome Deputy Robert Troy, TD. Robert, thank you very much for joining us. Also, Deputy Peter Burke, Minister for European Affairs, you're very welcome. Senators, councillors. We're now reaching the midway point of the current financial year, and we're only weeks away from the summer economic statement. So, of course, this summer economic statement will shape the budget for 2024, which we will have later on in the autumn. So it is a timely opportunity for us to take stock, and that's what we're doing here this morning. And we'll get an idea of where the economy is at and what we can expect later in the year in the budget. Of course, we have an expert panel here this morning to bring us through all that, and I'm going to introduce them now. From my left, we have Dr. Alison Sheridan, Head of Department of Business and Management at TUS Midlands Midwest. Alison is a BCom graduate from NUIG and has a Master's in Strategic HRM from Sheffield University. Alison also has a PhD from DCU, focused on the nature of HRM in service sectors for SMEs. Alison also participates in the Midlands region of CIPD. And Alison, you're very welcome, and thanks for your time here this morning. Next, we have the Minister for Finance, and you can give them a collective round of applause at the end if that's okay. But next, we have the Minister for Finance, Michael McGrath, TD, currently TD for Cork South Central, and was first elected to the Dáil in 2007. 16 years later, here he is with us as Minister for Finance. He previously served as the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform from 2020 to December 2022. Michael is a BCom graduate from UCC and is also a qualified chartered accountant. So I just want to thank you, Michael, sincerely for joining us again this year and for this morning's event. And I want to thank your colleague, Robert Troy, TD, for facilitating your presence here, and indeed Councillor Vinnie McCormick, who also assisted us greatly in organising the event. So next I have Jackie Masterson. Jackie is partner in RBK for over 13 years. Jackie heads up the RBK tax practice. She's a law and accounting graduate from UL. She's also a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Ireland and a chartered tax advisor. Jackie has specialised in tax for over 25 years. So Jackie, you're very welcome, and thanks for giving us your time here this morning. Next then we have John Finn, economist. John is Managing Director of Treasury Solutions, a Cork-based Treasury risk and corporate finance management practice. John has a BCom from UCD and is a chartered accountant since 1989. John is a member of the Irish Association of Corporate Treasurers and of the UK Association of Corporate Treasurers. So John, you're very welcome, and thanks again for giving us your time this morning. Last but not least, I want to introduce Lorcan Allen. He is our moderator this morning. Lorcan is a business editor of the Business Post since April 2021. Previously a journalist with the Irish Farmers Journal. He's a graduate of NUIG, and Lorcan has become a frequent contributor to many national radio programmes, not least The Last Word, which you'd hear him on regularly, and many more. So Lorcan, you're very welcome, and thanks for giving us your time this morning. We will have a Q&A session during this morning's event, and Lorcan will invite questions from the floor here from time to time. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and wait until you receive a mic, and you can give us your name and followed by your question. Also, for all of our viewers online, you can post questions in the chat box, and they'll appear here for our moderator to raise. So without further ado, I'll hand you over now to Lorcan and Alan. Enjoy the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thank you everyone for turning out here this morning on what is a bit of a miserable morning and the first break in our summer weather that we've enjoyed so far for the last month. Look, it's great to gather again for these events. I think the last event I did with the Athlone Chamber was online, so I think there's a real appetite for these in-person gatherings and to bring people together and share ideas. So, look, we have a really good panel this morning. We'll get straight into it because there's so many topics to discuss. Minister, if you don't mind, I might come to you first of all. When I look at the Irish economy today, I think it's quite extraordinary what's happening. We've come off a period of 40-year high inflation. It's still very high. We're coming down, but it's still quite high. We've got rapid rise in interest rates over the last 6 months, and yet the indicators of the Irish economy are still very strong. Record low unemployment, strong growth, very strong exports. What's your analysis of where we are today as a country?
Thank you, Lorcan, and can I just first of all thank Alan and the team for the invitation here, to thank my colleague, Deputy Robert Troy, for making the connection and facilitating this. And it's great to be here with my colleague, Minister Peter Burke, the Mayor, to Keirlook, and all of the councillors. Delighted to have the opportunity. To your question, the backdrop internationally is one of significant uncertainty, and the major issue that we're all grappling with is inflation, which is falling. Thankfully, in Ireland it did peak at almost 10% last year. It's now about 5.4% and falling. We think it'll average less than 5% across the year and fall to about half of that, 2.5% next year. But of course, all forecasts are speculative, and there is a high degree of uncertainty. But the performance of the Irish economy has been stellar, considering the shocks we've had, Brexit, the pandemic, and of course the inflationary spiral caused by the terrible war in Ukraine. So we are in a good position, relatively speaking, but we can't be complacent and we can't take anything for granted. At the moment, we're seeing an economy that is pretty much at full capacity. And we need to be careful of overheating pressures that are emerging. We have unemployment at the lowest level on record, 3.8%, more than 2.6 million people at work. So labour is a real constraint, and we hear that everywhere we go around the country, and engaging with a wide range of different sectors. That's a common theme that comes up time and time again. The public finances are in very good health, though we have to be careful about the underlying vulnerabilities, the growing dependence on corporation tax and the concentration of those receipts from a very small number of companies. And that's why we do need to make decisions to safeguard the health of our public finances into the future. So we are now at an important moment. We have the Summer Economic Statement, which we plan to publish next week, which will set out the parameters of Budget 2024 in terms of the scale of the budget day package between tax and expenditure, the core package, what do we need to do on non-core, what is the future of the public capital investment programme. So I'm working closely with my colleague Minister Donoghue, with the party leaders, to try and get the balance right between ensuring we continue to provide sufficient support for the economy while at the same time not adding to inflationary pressures. And of course we've monetary policy tightening, so interest rates are going up. That's to try and dampen economic activity, bring demand and supply back more into equilibrium. And we just have to make sure that on the fiscal side that we're not pushing inflation back up. So it is a delicate balance, because there are many households still under pressure. We have to make sure we help them insofar as we can, and a lot of businesses are dealing with rising costs and competitiveness challenges. So it is a delicate tightrope that we have to walk, but we've done so successfully to date, and I'm satisfied that we will do so again.
And Minister, can you maybe give some of the business leaders here this morning and maybe a sense of what might be in that Summer Economic Statement in terms of what you're thinking around budget for 2024 might look?
So the Summer Economic Statement is high level in nature. It essentially sets out the guardrails of the budget. So it will reveal what the scale of the budget day package is going to be. And then it falls to myself and Minister Donoghue to negotiate with all of our colleagues then between now and October on the detail of that. So it does set the overall direction. We're receiving a lot of advice, as you would expect, from the Fiscal Advisory Council, the Central Bank, a whole range of domestic and international bodies. There is a broad consensus as to what we need to do and what we don't need to do. What we don't need to do is to overly add too much stimulus to an economy that's already going very well. But at the same time, I think there are structural issues we need to deal with to ensure we remain competitive into the future. I have already signalled that on the indigenous SME enterprise side, I do think that we need to have a fresh look at a whole range of the different tax measures that are there. Look forward to hearing what Jackie has to say on that in a moment. Foreign direct investment is going incredibly well. We have to make sure we renew and reinvest in that offering, make sure it remains highly competitive, because the global landscape is changing very rapidly. But alongside that, we do need to achieve a balance in our economy, and I want Ireland to be an attractive country for entrepreneurs to start a business, but then more fundamentally to be the location where they scale up and grow that business so that it becomes their permanent base into the future as they expand internationally. So I think we've work to do around the taxation system, around capital markets, to make sure that the right mix of incentives and supports are there. So I will be focusing on that. I've already signalled in relation to the property market, we need to bring stability to the rental market, and I have indicated that I will be introducing some measures with a view to achieving a degree of stability there, to try and keep investment in the rental market for landlords who are currently there, and to try and attract new investment. So those are some areas where I will be focusing. Obviously, we will have an income tax package in line with the programme for government, and it's important we do, because if you have a static tax system, as incomes rise, it's effectively an increase through the back door, and people's not just nominal tax contribution increases, but their effective rate of tax actually increases as their incomes rise if you do nothing with your tax system. We are also going to be focused on the changes to corporation tax. We have to implement Pillar 2 of the OECD International Deal, which will be the rate of 15%, but that only applies to the largest multinationals with a turnover of at least €750 million. So it's important just to give the reassurance for all of the indigenous businesses. The rate will remain at 12.5%, and we are examining the flexibilities we have then within the international framework to make sure that our system remains very, very competitive. So looking at issues like the research and development tax credit, for example, just to give some pointers.
Sure. Okay. Jackie, might come to you on the tax side. I mean, the government has a lot of money in its surplus, forecasted surplus for the coming years to play with. I'm sure you're hearing it from clients, businesses, SMEs. You know, they'd like to see some maybe tax measures. What in your view, could the government do to help businesses, indigenous businesses?
Yes. So look, I think there's loads of different areas that could be looked at. Welcome the indication the Minister has given that he's going to look at the measures that are currently in place for the SME sector, because I think whilst there are measures there certainly is room for improvement in certain areas. For smaller businesses or start-up businesses, we have a number of measures such as EIIS, SURE, the small company startup exemption, and they're very valuable reliefs, but there's probably some tinkering around the edges of those, I think, that could be done to improve them. The R&D tax credit that you've mentioned, I think with Pillar 2, and whilst it only impacts the larger companies, some of their investment decisions here could be impacted by a reduction in the effective rate of that credit for them. And I think to address that, if the credit could be introduced to 30%, and I know there's state aid and other issues to consider there, but that I think would maintain the rate for the larger companies, but more importantly, allow that 30% rate for SMEs if that were possible. We could look, I suppose, at the green agenda and maybe higher rates of R&D for certain categories like other countries have. The R&D credit itself, there's probably some areas for improvement there, or issues that SMEs might have in accessing that, around the deduction for rental expenses, overheads. The actual, I suppose, application process for it can be quite complex for SMEs to navigate. So if there were maybe a pre-approval process for first-time claimants, I think that would be very helpful. Moving on then to the scaling up piece, which the Minister mentioned for businesses, and I think that's very important too, to encourage them to stay the course, and we really see the value from businesses when entrepreneurs stick with them. But I suppose the challenges for entrepreneurs, they are around the personal tax system, the capital tax system, and financing. And again, I think there's a lot that could be done. Our headline rate of CGT is one of the highest in the EU. It was increased in the last financial crisis, reducing it for active businesses, maybe a tapered relief for people who stay with the business long term. Our entrepreneur relief, it is a valuable relief, but again, if it could be increased, we could look at measures around financing SMEs and maybe a reduced rate of income tax for loans into SMEs, or specific rates around dividends. So I think there's so much that can be done. It's a fantastic headache, I think, to have. But I think the focus rightly has to be, because of the concentration around the multinationals, the challenges in the international landscape,
and
focus has to be SMEs.
You hear it as well, when we have an ambition to help Indigenous Irish businesses grow and scale, and that's what we want them to do. I'm sure you hear it all the time that succession is really a big challenge for a lot of Irish businesses, and often tax plays into that, and how businesses manage succession. So there's certainly probably something we can do in that regard in terms of helping business owners, pass on their businesses to the next generation in a tax efficient manner.
Absolutely,
rather than selling up.
Yeah, and there are, I suppose, reliefs that we have currently around that to reduce, again, the headline rate of gift or inheritance tax is quite high. We do have reliefs. The capital gains tax relief on passing businesses, a number of years ago, a limit was introduced around that, where an individual is over 66 and the value of the business is over 3 million, restrictions apply. And again, I'm not quite sure the policy rationale for that, but sometimes business owners need to stick with the business longer than that, or the family aren't ready. So again, I think maybe if that could be relaxed.
Yeah. Alison, Sheridan, I might come to you, and Technological University, Shannon. A different sector, it's not tax, I suppose, but you guys will have, your sector will have asks as well from the government to the budget. I think every sector will have asks, Minister. But maybe outline some of what the education sector might like to see in the budget.
Certainly. Well, the first thing is to, I suppose, welcome the Minister's comment on supporting SMEs further. I mean, as we know, within our region, and we're an enabler as a technological university to enhance what can be achieved in terms of the regional economy. SMEs make up 99.8% of all enterprises in Ireland, so we need to be really conscious that while the tax receipts come, the headline tax receipts come from the multinational corporations, that ultimately our Indigenous sector is really important. So I welcome what the Minister has said in terms of supporting the SMEs further. But to move on to what the technological university sector might like, of course, I suppose it would be remiss of me to sit alongside a Minister for Finance with money in his pocket and to not mention that perhaps further funding for third level education would serve the economy well and serve the regions well. And I know the Minister and also Minister Harris has been supportive in terms of funding future and the options that are laid out there. But of course, as every student and every parent knows, apart from getting your CAO points to get to university, the next issue is, of course, affordable student accommodation. So I know there are moves there to work on that, but we'd be really appreciative of anything that can be done to, I suppose, enhance those options for students who are trying to get accommodation in university towns. So that's a key thing for us in terms of our student population, to allow them to access third level education, and we want it to be something that's accessible. That's a key priority.
Alison, you were saying to me that there's, because of the way the rules around how TUs are sort of their financing structures, it's, you can't raise your own capital to build your own, whereas a university can.
Yeah, so the traditional universities have more scope within the legislation currently, and I know the indicators are there that the government has indeed agreed to relax those and to provide for the technological university sector to borrow, but that borrowing framework needs to be established, and I suppose we would like to see that expedited so that we could do as much as possible to develop within our own regions and our own areas. Yes, that's a key thing.
Yeah. Okay. John, Finn, if I could come to you as an economist, maybe back to my original point about the economy that I asked the Minister. It's quite an extraordinary thing, the Irish economy's sort of resilience. It's completely bucked the trend. We're by far the fastest growing economy in Europe almost. What's your analysis of where we are as a country, and how sustainable is our current strength, given that interest rates are going to probably stay higher for longer?
Well, I mean, the Minister has already referenced things like 3.8% unemployment. If you look back to, say, 2008, where we were maybe in a similar situation employment-wise, we had 240,000 people employed in construction. We have 160,000 today, and we know we need more. So when you think about we're at the lowest level of employment ever, and we're short probably 60, 70, 80,000 construction workers alone to catch up there, that will tell you how tight capacity is. The finances, we've referenced already, as I'm sure in the statement tomorrow, there's more statement about what our surplus is, and then let's call it even more, the super surplus of corporation tax, which is income is about 10 or 11 billion, which is incredible again. But I did some figures, as you can imagine, Lorcan, and just to put it in perspective for everybody, and this is important actually in the context of where we are, because 15 years ago we were in a very different position. 15 years ago, private deposits were exceeded by private debt by 68 billion. In other words, private individuals owed 68 billion net. Today, that figure is they have 51 billion on deposit net. Private companies owed 128 billion net in 2008. We owed 171 billion with deposits of 42 billion. Today, that's a 47 billion surplus again, deposits. So we've gone from owing 128 billion as companies, and that's Irish companies, not multinationals, to actually having 47 billion. That's a seismic move in, if I can say, the balance sheets of the country, which gives you, I think, and that's probably some of the resilience. And also, when you get back to the economy, we've seen GDP technically has fallen last year. GNI is actually increasing. Consumer spending drives a lot of it, and consumer spending is holding up. And I think partly because we've had that change in I suppose, the relative strength of people's balance sheets over the last 15 years, albeit with a lot of pain over 15 years, but nevertheless, that's where we are today. And as long as consumer spending holds up, that seems to keep economic growth going, taking over nicely. And I think that's where we are still to date.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. There's less leverage in the economy, so that we're less affected by the rising interest rates as if we were more borrowed as a society, both as businesses and as consumers. People are more, people have mortgages and things, and they're not immune to the rising interest rates, but it's not the same level of debt that was there.
No, and I think it's in pockets, and I think that's probably actually what the Minister was referencing. Like, there are people who are under pressure, and I wouldn't like to, don't want to gloss over it. There are, but nevertheless, on average, we're in a much better position in that regard. And the irony is you can see those deposits and debt figures reflected in the bank's balance sheets as well. The banks have way more on deposit than they're lending right now. So they're struggling to lend, actually, in the sense of they need to lend more to make money. They've had a tough time in the sense of negative interest rates were hard on them. Now it's the opposite. They can put money on deposit with the ECB, get 3.5%. And think about it, if you're putting it with the ECB, 3.5%, no risk, guaranteed return, they're going to bank a couple of 100 million each on that side. And lending is actually, we'll probably cover it later on, Lorcan, but lending is beginning to tighten a little bit as well. Again, the lack of competition is becoming a bit of a problem.
Yeah. Minister, maybe to come back to you on that, so it's been well aired. The health of the public finances, we're in an extraordinary lucky position, as we mentioned, the good headache that you have coming this October. But we've also had warnings as well about how the state should manage this sort of windfall taxes that we're seeing in terms of the corporate tax side. But so maybe can you give me a sense of, you said that the summer economic statement will outline at a high level what the spending might be. What could that look like? How obviously the government wants to increase spending, but it has to also manage that. How far might you go?
Well, first of all, the story of corporation tax receipts is an extraordinary one, and that is what is driving the surpluses. So a decade ago, we were collecting about €4 billion a year. This year, we believe it will be in the region of €24 billion in corporation tax receipts. In 2020, it was about 12 billion, so it's doubled since 2020. So the rate of growth has been dramatic, but then within that, there is an ever-growing concentration in terms of the amount of that is paid by the top 10 companies. So last year we estimate it was about 57% of all those receipts come from 10 companies, and the Fiscal Council have done some further work, and they believe between 2017 and 21 the top 3 companies paid 30% of those receipts. So you can see the level of dependence that there is on a relatively small number of companies across a very small number of sectors. So we do need to be careful about what we do with those receipts, because the advice I'm receiving as Minister from my own department and from the Revenue Commissioners is that about half of the receipts we're collecting this year are potentially windfall in nature and may not repeat every year into the future. We're not saying that those receipts are going to evaporate overnight, but what it does mean is that we can't build up permanent expenditure or indeed taxation commitments on the back of receipts that could prove to be temporary. Because if they do prove to be temporary, then we're left with a very big hole in the public finances. So that really is the anchor of the discussion that we're having with the party leaders at the moment, and which we will be setting out in the summer economic statement next week. In terms of the scale of the budgetary package, I mean, the background is we signed up to a spending rule. It's a net spending rule of 5% growth every year in expenditure. We signed up to that in 2021. We departed from that last year because of the inflationary environment. The composition of that spending rule, without boring you, is it's based on 3% growth, nominal growth in the economy, and inflation of around 2%. So last year we departed because inflation was forecast in the current year to be about 7%. So we made a variation. And now what we have to consider is what is the appropriate package for 2024, taking into account all of the issues we've spoken about so far, that we're pretty much at capacity, there is a risk of overheating, but at the same time inflation is over 5%, it's falling, but price levels in general are not yet falling. So some households remain under pressure. So we're going to finalise that in the next week and then lay out both in percentage terms and in nominal terms what that means for the scale of the budget package. And we'll also give an indication then of our plans on public investment, because I do think it's important that we continue with an ambitious public capital programme, and then alongside all of that, I'm developing an overall plan for the management of the finances for the next decade and beyond, because we are in a sweet spot at the moment. It won't last forever. We know the demographics will impose real costs. We estimate that by the end of this decade, the cost of just standing still will be about 7 to 8 billion euro more to provide public services than it was at the beginning of this decade, and that's simply a function of demographics. So at the moment we have about 4 people of working age for every person of pension age. In the coming decades that ratio will halve to 2 to 1. So you can see the consequences for pension costs, nursing home care, healthcare, home care, and so on. So we do need to provide for that. And I'm also conscious that in the past, when we hit economic shocks or downturns, the first victim in the public finances was capital investment. So we have to make sure that we have a mechanism to smooth out capital investment over the years ahead, to make sure it doesn't fall off a cliff, because you have to invest through the cycle. And in fact, when the economy is weaker is when the governments should be stepping in to do more. So we're working on all of those elements, so there'll be a certain amount of detail next week in the summer economic statement, but much more then on budget day in October.
Yeah, and that lack of investment maybe a decade ago in capital projects is probably the reason why the country is really tight for capacity at the minute. Just in terms of the changing demographics, I mean, one of the things that's repeatedly called out by the economic groups is the pensions time bomb, as it's called, or whatever. And a lot of employers here in the room will know that there's been changes around mandatory enrolment, auto enrolment on pensions. There's been, if we were to fund a pensions, the state pension in the years ahead, PRSI may have to change and all that. They've also said that we should use these corporate tax windfalls to fund a new, a pension fund or an investment fund that would take the pressure off future PRSI increases. What's your thinking there at the minute on that?
So we have made some pretty significant decisions on foot of the Pensions Commission report. So we are sticking with the pension age of 66. But we are introducing far more flexibility in the system. So for people who want to work longer and have an opportunity to do so, they will be able to defer accessing the pension will get a higher pension because they're deferring it, and will have an opportunity to continue to pay in PRSI if they're short in their overall contribution. So I think that flexibility is a good thing. We will be introducing the system of auto-enrolment. So Minister Humphreys and her colleagues are doing a huge amount of work on that at the moment, and the aim is that in Q4 of next year that system will be in place. There are just too many workers in the private sector who do not have any pension coverage, and we simply have to address that. But even with a fund for long-term savings to meet future demographic costs, it's not going to fully offset the scale of the costs that are coming our way in the coming decades. So there will be changes to our taxation system. There will be changes in particular to our PRSI system. Over time, we are going to have to pay in more, and that is the cost of keeping the pension age as it is. And the changes can be modest and they will start in the coming years, but we do have to recognise the financial reality that, you know, thankfully we are getting older, we're living longer, we have one of the longest life expectancies in the world, and if we keep the pension age as it is, then we're going to be drawing a pension for much longer, and the overall cost of that for the state is going to be very, very substantial. So we need to provide for that, and that's one of the reasons why we have to put funding away into a fund which will deliver an annual return, and that will help to offset the annual costs then of meeting those costs of demographics.
Yeah, Jackie, from your perspective, it looks like our PRSI contributions are going to have to increase in the future. I mean, does that mean that the government can do more then around personal income tax to try and offset that, or are we just robbing Peter to pay Paul in terms of the public finances if we make tax cuts in other areas when PRSI has to go up?
Yeah, I think if PRSI has to go up, and I understand the pensions issue and the challenge that we're going to face there, but I think something has to be done around our income tax rate. Talent is mobile, businesses are mobile, and our personal tax rate, which is 52% for employed individuals and 55% when you take the USC and PRSI into account for self-employed, it's really high compared to EU norms. The optics of marketing Ireland as a location to locate business is challenging when you have to explain that rate of tax and the fact that it kicks in at a relatively low rate compared to EU standards. So I think something has to be done, whether that's increasing the standard rate band, so instead of paying the higher rate at 40,000, it's paid at a higher level, or tinkering with the top rate. Something needs to be done. It obviously can't all be done at once. I think if we had a roadmap around personal tax reform similar to what we had for corporate tax reform, that would give businesses, I think, certainty. But I think something has to be done around it.
John, maybe to come to yourself on the sort of corporate tax windfalls that the government is benefiting from at the minute. They're once-off in nature. Maybe spending them in ongoing spending is not wise. What would you, if you were given the pot of money, what would you invest it in that would benefit the economy and not blow things up?
I have 4 daughters. I know what it would be. Probably most of it will go on them. I think the approach, I think the minister's referenced it, is you've got to treat the if I could say the income expenditure minus that surplus stuff as income and expenditure, and the surplus really has to be for investment, because I think we have an infrastructure deficit in certain parts of the economy. I think you're right. We underspent and underinvested because of the crisis. Let's say from 2008 to 2015. So there's a bit of catching up happening there. So we need money to catch up. And that's certainly a key aspect of it. And I'm interested that you're looking at a 10-year plan, because I think that's important, because you've referenced demographic change already, which is aging population and all that they're not going to affect that. We have a growing population anyway. We have more people coming into the country, and at 3.8% employment, that's unemployment. Sorry, that's going to continue. The climate change is going to require, I think, significant investment, one way or the other. And climate change and demographics, by the way, will be related too, because if you take what's happening, that's one of the things. I don't read that much books. I read articles and the geeky stuff, But there's The Power of Geography. Tim Marshall, he's a geographer, and I'm reading his second book. It's the older one actually, but it's actually very interesting to read, because he talks about how geography impacts so much. And, talking about climate change, that if you get the climate change you're talking about, people have to move from the places that become uninhabitable to the places that are more temperate.
See that already happening, yeah.
And, if you take that to an extreme, we're kind of insulated, dare I say it, because we're an island. That's not going to continue. Our population is going to keep growing and growing. We need it partially for economic terms, and I think in terms of the demographics and the climate, it will probably lead to it as well. So you've got to kind of front load investment in some respects to prepare for, because that's where it's going. On the issue of will it stay, I worked in the IFSC in the early 90s, because that's how old I am. And at that time you had a 10%, those of you who are old enough with me, remember there was a 10% corporation tax rate for exporters and manufacturers and 40% for everybody else, which is actually mostly SMEs. And the EU said you can't have two rates, you've got to have one rate. So when the Department of Finance at the time ran the numbers, 12.5% was the rate that gave them the same amount of revenue. So they were still generating most of the revenue then from the 10% taxpayers, okay? And there was worries at the time about going from 10 to 12.5. That's a huge jump. It's a 25% increase. Didn't make any effect. 10 to 12.5 was still, relatively speaking, it's still internationally, it's a low rate, and we just, got more tax revenue. So I think going from 12.5 to 15, I'm not going to say the money's going to stay forever, but I think it might stay for a while, because I think all multinationals accept that they have to pay more tax. All governments between the financial crisis and COVID, an awful lot of them are running deficits, which means they need more tax revenues. And I think they're kind of saying to multinationals globally, you're going to have to start paying more, because we need it to fund housing, to fund health, to fund education. So there's probably a little bit less of a barrier, maybe, or from a pressure perspective that was there before. There's an acceptance they have to pay more, I think, to some extent.
Just conscious, a lot of people in the room here might have questions for the panel. So if you maybe put up your hand and we'll get a microphone to you and get some questions for the panel. On your point, John, quite interesting, yesterday I had a conversation with a tax partner in one of the big firms who would do a lot of work with multinationals, and they kind of talked about how they had spent a lot of their last 5 years onshoring IP of these big tech multinationals into Ireland, which is, they said they could see that the tax windfalls would come because they were moving the IP into Ireland and they would be taxed here. But they explained to me how the reason why the Department of Finance warns that this is going to run out is that the IP is like any asset, it will run out its course. And they said what the country needs to do now is invest in R&D so that more IP is developed here, and then we can tax it here and it's located here in Ireland. And to that point, maybe Alison, I might come to you in terms of the education sector. How do we encourage greater work between the education sector for R&D and business to generate that IP here in Ireland rather than it coming from the US or wherever?
Yeah, well, I suppose first of all, that's part of the remit of the technological university sector, if we take the sector, is to become more enabled to facilitate that type of research. And at the moment, the research that we do is a mixture of pure research and a lot of it is applied research. So there's benefit for our local economies, our regions, in terms of being involved in that type of research. Funding, I suppose the traditional universities and our technological universities are starting from a different base point in terms of that research agenda, and we're very anxious to redress or rebalance that equation as we go forward. And again, I smile at the Minister. I'm sure there are many ways in which we could support the greater extension of research within the TU sector, because that's something we want to do. We have the capacity, I suppose, to do innovative things within the technological university sector. An example that I came across, or that we have been dealing with recently in our own college, is we're looking at a previously disused peat extraction site, which of course will fit in with the Just Transition initiative. And within that, and that's based down in County Offaly in Mount Lucas. And we're looking at developing an aquaculture site, making it fully sustainable. And we're looking at this as a research site where we can look end to end from how business can be involved in one area and make sure that everything about it is sustainable. So those type of initiatives, the capacity to take that type of initiative, I think really is something that we need to free up a little bit of finance to allow us to do those things, so that we can support the sort of the research agenda. And if we are responding to the needs of our employers, in the region. If they're coming here, not only because we've a skilled population in terms of workforce, but if we can meet their research needs, I think that's going to really help in terms of why people would want to be located here. The IP and the transfer, there are always, I suppose, challenges around how that's managed, and there's no one simple answer for that. But we do our best to work within the rules that are there in terms of technology transfers and so on and so forth. But there's a lot of challenges there to be worked through. Some of it is funding based, but I think we are very conscious of our regional employers. We're able to identify their needs, and we're able to respond to their needs if we're able to do so. With maybe some more support.
If I may, Lorcan, I think it is a combination of the measures that you've identified, Jackie, to make sure we have an environment that is conducive to investment by small and medium-sized enterprises, to entrepreneurs, and combining that with the focus on research. And I think a lot of good progress has been made. We see a very exciting future for the technological universities. We will be addressing the issues around access to borrowing. As you know, we've undertaken a new initiative around student accommodation, so we'll be working very positively with the sector there. But I think just having a dedicated government department focused on research, science, innovation is a very powerful signal internationally, which has been really well received. But we do have to back that up with investment and find ways of unlocking the National Training Fund as well. I know a lot of employers here have been paying into, so we are trying to work out innovative ways of making sure that fund is used for the purpose for which it was established, while at the same time respecting the expenditure rules that are there. And then I just think more broadly, we have to focus on the bottlenecks in the economy. So we're going really well, but there are bottlenecks there. Our planning system is an area crying out for reform. That's why we've transformative new legislation coming into the Oireachtas. So we have to try and add capacity where we can and become more efficient in the way that we deliver projects, and in both the public and the private sector. And what you will see in the budget again is a very keen focus on housing, just given the centrality of the issue all over the country. Because John is absolutely right. I mean, our population grew by 8% in the census up to 2022, which is dramatic growth over a 6-year period. Almost 400,000 of an increase. Every county in Ireland experiencing a population increase. It's not that long ago the talk was about rural Ireland dying, and that's not the case now. And we believe that even in the 14 months since the census, the population has probably grown by north of 150,000 people. Much of that Ukrainians coming here, people seeking international protection, but also there's a natural increase, and then there are people coming in with employment permits whom we welcome and we really need. But it does mean that we have to provide the accommodation, and we do have to invest. So when I'm looking at the overall balance of what we need to do with these surplus receipts, so what we can't do is make permanent expenditure commitments. We can do more in terms of public investment, provided we're getting value for money, as well as then putting a lot of it away to meet the costs that are coming. So it's just about striking that right balance, but housing will be once again front and centre in the forthcoming budget.
Lorcan, just on that, just to wrap it up, the things, I mean, I work with a lot of SMEs and that. Entrepreneurs are never short of ideas, and sometimes it's just they need help and research. Like there's a the like of the technological university looking for research projects that are practical, because they don't want theoretical stuff. There's a need maybe to invest a little bit in that space. I don't think the government would necessarily have to put a lot of money into it to facilitate. I'm going to call it maybe a little bit research stroke venture funding, because I've spoken to somebody, because I'm from Lanesborough, just up the road, and obviously just transitioned and all that. We've been hit by the power station, been closed and that, and they were saying that some of the stuff, in theory, it's fine, but like if you have a 50 grand feasibility project and you've got to come up with 10 grand of that yourself, that might be a push to somebody who has a good idea, but just doesn't have the financial wherewithal. And, relatively speaking, I think you're going to have to try and fail in this space. But if we're going to, talking about the IP thing and replace it, you're going to have to invest in that space and allow SMEs and entrepreneurs to access research, access that sort of stuff at a relatively low spend to try, because, 1 in 10, if they're good, that could become very good very quickly, particularly down the country,
Folks, any questions from the floor there? One over here. Might get a microphone there, just here at this table. You might give your name and your organisation.
Okay. Good morning. William Smith's my name from the Fitzwilliam Group. Apologies in advance. I should have my question better framed up than I have. It wasn't my intention to ask one. But just listening to what's going on, and you mentioned the bottlenecks. For the economy to do well, in no particular order, we need workers, jobs, bank accounts, houses, and so on and so forth. And this is no disrespect to the government or anything like that. If you arrived in Ireland today and you couldn't arrive without getting the proper visa or whatever, but if you wanted to make an application to come into Ireland, the length of time that would take you is phenomenal. And there's not huge recourse for if the answer is no before you start. If you get through that process and you want to open a bank account, it's absolutely appalling what you have to go through to open a bank account. And God forbid if you wanted a credit card, you probably go to Mars quicker than you get the credit card. If those bottlenecks that you refer to and the housing and stuff which you're working on are not addressed, we have a theory in our company, the 95% 5% rule. What's 95% will become 5% in 5 to 7 years, which might tie in with your tax surplus. It could be gone in 5 years. But if we don't create the next wave of entrepreneurs, workers, where's the next 95% going to come from? The gentleman here on my left said he worked in the financial services centre. We did the temporary supplies for it, so I'm a little bit older than you are. When that started, I had no idea what the financial services centre was. I didn't know whether they made money, printed money. I had no idea, but back in, I think it was the late 80s it started. And it was it has been a phenomenal success. If you're down there at 6:30 in the morning, particularly before COVID, it's like Croke Park on All Ireland Day with the amount of people moving around. And the money that idea has brought into Ireland is beyond phenomenal. Where's the next financial services centre? And again, apologies, I didn't frame my question better than...
No, but I think where's the next new wave of ideas that are going to fuel the Irish economy, Minister?
Yeah,
you might
I think
address that.
it's a great question, William, and you summed up a lot of issues there. I mean, the next financial services centre is all over Ireland, because if you take that as an example, it started off down the docks in Dublin, but it's now nationwide. You have clusters all over the country. You know, you look at Kilkenny, you look at Cork, Galway, all the main centres now have a very significant presence of international financial services companies. So that's one area where we have had great success. Life sciences, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, just to name a few other examples. But you do touch on key practical issues, and for any well-run society and country, those issues have to be efficiently dealt with. So, for example, people coming into Ireland, at the moment, if they're outside the EEA, they have to apply for an employment permit from the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, and then separately, following that, have to apply to the Department of Justice for a visa to enter Ireland. So we're now going to introduce a single application system, so an integrated system, so that it's one application process. And to be fair, the permit system has been invested in, and the turnaround times are much, much quicker than they were. So that's one simple reform. On the issue of opening bank accounts and so on, like, we are governed there by anti-money laundering legislation, directives at an EU level, so it's not entirely within the control of the domestic system. But we are seeing, more and more players competing on that pitch, non-bank lenders, fintechs, digital providers. So I take your point. You're focusing on the practical issues that affect people in their day-to-day lives, and you also make the point about where is the next wave of entrepreneurs going to come from. And I think it's the very issues that we've been talking about here this morning, that we just have to create that environment where Ireland is attractive to start, but to stay. fundamentally, and that's what I want to see, because too many are leaving Ireland too quickly, or are selling up earlier than we'd like them to.
Maybe just to add to that slightly, it is a real practical difficulty for companies that are looking in certain industries to bring in employees here, and for overseas businesses setting up. I think additional resources in the Department of Social Protection around applications for PPS numbers, which can delay the bank account piece, would be something practical, I think, that would help in that regard.
Yeah, like even on the housing front, Minister, one of the accountancy firms told me recently that they hire about 200 people from abroad every year, and once they offer the contract, they do the deal, 25% of people who have agreed to join the company actually turn down it, because when they research the Irish housing market, they say, I can't afford to come to Ireland. And that's a real constraint, obviously, on the Irish economy. Is there any other questions? Maybe there's a lady here.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Foster. I'm from the Better Working Lives for All Committee. Minister, thank you very much for the Athlone Chamber today as well. It's been excellent. This is somewhat an elephant in Leinster House. I'm going to ask this question, and I'm sorry it's directed at you, Minister. It should be at your coalition partner. I just want to ask, when will the COVID review take place? I know we don't like to look back in anger, but it's very important that we do. Because would you agree with your coalition partner, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, that it should be non-blame apportioning? And for the HSE, previous HSE CEO, that it should be non-revisionist? I certainly don't. I think we need to learn, we need to reform, we need to learn from the mistakes of the past. And I think it's wholly wrong that our Taoiseachs should say it's non-blame apportioning when people suffered. And not only that, there was 3.5 billion pumped into the HSE over COVID. Where did it go? We've heard from whistleblowers that said it wasn't properly accounted for. We need to look into this. We really do need to find out where this money went, Minister, and I'm very passionate about that this COVID review is done properly with proper terms of reference and not done by Paul Reid. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Well, the Taoiseach has indicated that it will be up and running later this year. I think we have to acknowledge the seismic nature of what we had to deal with. It was a once-in-a-century pandemic. When we look back and think that only a couple of years ago we couldn't go 2 kilometres or 5 kilometres from our home, it was really extraordinary. And I don't think any country in the world handled it perfectly. We were all trying to find our way through it, listen to advice, look at the latest research. But I do think in the round, when you look at the Irish experience, the mortality rate, which is a terrible thing to be talking about, but when you look at that, when you look at the way in which our economy responded, notwithstanding all of the terrible pain that undoubtedly was endured by far, far too many people, I think Ireland, when the full story is told, will be seen to have handled the pandemic well. Not everybody will agree with that. I do agree that there needs to be a review. It should be about examining what we did well, what we didn't do so well. Having accountability for all of that, of course, is important. But I don't think it's about blaming anybody, because everybody was trying their very, very best to do the right thing to protect public health. That was the government's priority. And we can see the inquiry that's going on in the UK at the moment. So there will be an initiative here in Ireland, but it will be about telling the story, examining where we could have done better, and making sure we learn the lessons and that we are as prepared as we can be in the future for an event that was absolutely seismic.
Yeah, just conscious of time, folks. We're coming up on the hour mark. If there's any final questions, maybe from the floor. There's one gentleman here. Which you might get a mic too.
Thanks very much. Michael Dole, Mount Temple Golf Course. I did speak with the Minister on a video link at the last meeting actually. But I own a golf course, but I also chair the Hidden Heartlands Golf Group. There are about 12 of us from the Slieve Russell down to Portumna, both sides of the Shannon. But the biggest thing that we have fantastic golf courses, world-class golf courses. We've reduced the Leona Maguires and the Shane Lowrys And to do so, you have to have world-class tracks to produce them. But we have 130,000 golfers passing through our region here on the motorways. And we've been over 10 years looking for direct signposting. We've had the Belvedere houses, semi-state, they have 55 up around the county as such, around the motorways. Now we have the Central Parks came in. Big investment, total rural setup, planning, a bit of financial backing too. They're up at signposting. But our organisation, and every other tourist organisation, it's the second industry after agriculture. But this region, I'm afraid, is not getting the return for direct signposting, and that goes for where we're standing, actually. We all went through the financial crash, the Brexits, the COVIDs, and the Ukraines, and we lost golf courses, as we did hotels. But the signposting, now we did a survey here a couple of years ago. When you're going motoring up and down the motorway, if you don't know what you're going through, you're going to keep on motoring, you know. And we have fantastic quality and standards of golf courses. I'd love to see the Minister. He's the man. He's the man at the top.
Minister for signposts.
The man at the
I didn't
top.
bring any signposts with me, Michael.
We've approached the Minister of Tourism. We've approached everybody. We're a long time at it.
Yeah, Minister, before you answer that question, I think that's a very good question, and we might finish on this. And it ties into one thing I was going to ask. You're in the Midlands here today. Often, you know, trying to get investment, stimulate the economy down here. Michael's point is, you know, part of that question. I mean, how does the government stimulate growth, economic activity in the regions outside, particularly Dublin, but also Cork and Limerick, to that balanced economy? And Michael's point, I think, is part of that.
Yeah, and I think it is happening overall. It is about the strategy of the IDA and also of Enterprise Ireland, and working with the local authorities and the regional bodies and the educational institutions, and that has to be then backed up by government investment in infrastructure. So I think initiatives like the National Broadband Plan, for example, open up enormous potential all over Ireland, and the timing of that has been, I think, very fortuitous given what has happened since the pandemic in terms of the change to hybrid and remote working. There are opportunities now for people, you know, to live anywhere in Ireland and to hold down a job that traditionally would have required them at least for a number of days of the week to be in a major urban centre working, and that's no longer a requirement. So I think that really is a game changer for towns and villages all over Ireland, including across the Midlands. So I think it is about all of those levers that we have to make sure are working together in terms of an overall national coherent policy. We are going to review the national planning framework because since it was adopted, a lot has happened, not least population change, increase, the pandemic, and it just changes in society, digitalisation, climate change. So we do have to examine, I think, what is the appropriate approach to spatial planning. Congratulations, Michael, on the golf courses. You must be very proud of all the success that Irish golfers are having at the moment. Padraig winning in the Seniors Tour last week, and Leona Maguire has been fantastic, and Shane Lowry, of course. So hopefully we'll have a good remainder of the current season. But look, I think it's something through the local authority members and the deputies we can examine. I agree on the importance of visibility. While it is the case that many people now are using, you know, apps and Google Maps and so on to find locations, that's not true for everybody, and signage does matter. So if we can help in any way through the local representatives in that regard, we'd be more than happy to help.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're just after 9 o'clock, and we promised we'd have you out of here by then. So you might put your hands together for my panel this morning: John Finn, Jackie Masterson, Alison, Sheridan, and the Minister of Finance, Michael McGrath. Thanks very much. Really good, engaged morning, really good discussion. And I might just ask Alan Shaw, the President of Athlone Chamber, to give a few closing remarks.
Thanks very much, Lorcan, and thanks very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the panel discussion this morning and take away lots of information that has been discussed here. So thank you, and thanks to everybody online. I do have a few specific thanks I want to mention. I want to thank all of the Chamber staff, our CEO, Tommy Hogan, who's on holiday at the moment, but I know Tommy is tuned in wherever he is. But Tommy, thanks for all your help in organising this morning. All of the team, Jessica, Keith, Sashi, thank you very much for helping out this morning. I omitted to acknowledge Councillor John Keogh Cahirlock of Roscommon County Council is joined us this morning as well. You're very welcome, John. I want to thank all the team at the Athlone Springs Hotel, in particular Aidan, Lauren and Mark. Thanks very much for making us feel so welcome here. It was very easy to get this organised with a team like this from the Athlone Springs, so thanks very much. I want to thank our sponsors, Professor Vincent Cannan from TOOS, Bill Delaney and Dr. Alison Sheridan for your funding support. I want to thank RBK, Joe Cleary and Brian Feeney and all the partners in RBK for your support, and Jackie indeed. I also want to thank a number of people who have helped us this morning in the organisation side, from our sponsors, Niamh Dunn and Claire Shaw from TOOS and Deirdre McElroy from RBK. I want to thank the Chamber Board for your support and helping to organise this event. And last but not least, I want to thank Bernard Coyle from Coyle Events Management for the sound and technical support and lighting this morning. So without further ado, just thank you all again for joining us this morning, for your attention. And just to let you know that there will be a recording of this morning's event on our YouTube channel with Athlone Chamber of Commerce. And also don't forget to share and like all the photographs that were taken on your way in this morning. And thanks again for your support. Enjoy the rest of the morning. Bye-bye.